Set to cruising speed. Lovely day around Mechator Rex.
Roger that. Just another day in the Imperium. Wait, hey, bogeys, 10 clicks away!
We're under attack. Colonel, to your battle station. But this time, we will be inscripted.
Sir, what do you mean?
Huh? Colonel, deploy your ships.
Yes, sir.
Unveil our secret weapon, the War Saw.
You got it, sir.
Splendid job, soldier.
What was that?
The legend. It's true.
What did I draw, sir?
2 by 5. Tyrants lament. Flee! Flee your ships! Drop your marker!
Twilight Imperium is one of the most popular space board games ever. You control an alien civilization, vying for control of the galaxy, politicking to weave deals, all while you have your eyes on the center of the universe called Mechator Rex. But man, that game is big and long, best with a higher player count, and must I say long one more time? Yeah, Twilight Imperium can easily take half a day when you're learning. So now we have a game that is not a substitute for this massive space opera, since Twilight Inscription here is just a pen and 4 sheets. Sheets will look like this, then become this. You're circling and crossing out stuff on said sheets, partly spurred on by random dice rolls every round, and you will be doing some degree of fighting with a warfare sheet. Well, get yourself in the mood for marking and writing down stuff, because Twilight Inscription is a Euro roll in write game for 1 to 8 players, takes 90 to 120 minutes. How to play. The goal of Twilight Inscription is to have the most points at the game end. You add them up from each sheet. Each sheet has 2 main ways to get points. One is from its objective everyone is trying to accomplish, and then 2 is just from circling victory point places on the sheet themselves. So to clarify, we have 4 sheets, each with their own way to circle points, with an objective to also race over. Okay, so since this is a roll and write, it's all about circling and crossing out things. If you circle something, that means you have it. Circle VP, it's yours. If you circle an asset, it's yours. To spend an asset, cross it out. At the start of each round, you flip over a card from the event deck, which will usually tell you what resources you get to spend. To mark stuff, you spend 1 resource to cross out the matching icon on a sheet, or you follow that sheet's special rules to see how that resource is spent. And you get to choose which sheet you want to mark every round, so let's get into them. First is navigation, where you explore or claim stuff. Exploring is extending an orange line 1 segment, and claiming is circling anything that's touching the explore orange line. Claiming planets is good because it can give you fuel for number 2, expansion. This is where you cross out claim planets to unlock planets. Then on the planets, you spend resources to play a bit of a row or column completion game. You complete any row or column, you get the asset that it matches. Number 3 is industry, where you get to spend to claim all these goodies here. But you can't claim aka circle something unless it's next to something that's been scrapped aka crossed out. These assets here are good because they get you victory points, but sometimes when you get multiple colors in a column, you get trade good income, which we'll explain in a bit. If you get the speech icon, it's a pretty similar idea. You directly increase this tracker here, which gives you voting income, which we'll also explain in a bit. Lastly, 4 is warfare, where you get to spend to deploy war units. Spend all the requirements, then spawn that unit on this grid thing, but it must be touching something that's already marked. So at the beginning, you can only spawn next to this bottom line, then you can build up. If you cover any asset with troops, you get that. Getting units is important because 4 times throughout the game, instead of flipping over a resource giving event, it'll say war. You must fight the neighbors on both your left and right sides. Then you count up all the dots you've marked up per side's box. That's your corresponding strength. The winner of the fight gets a bonus. The loser will get a negative VP penalty. Then you draw a new combat line and start building up from there for the next fight. Also, once the 4th word card resolves, that's it. The game's over. That's it. It's all over. Also, do you remember the objectives everyone wants? Well, if you're the first to get it, you get the big number. Then flip it over, everyone else can get the small one. Same goes for claiming Mechator Rex. If you're the first to get it, you write down your name. That's points. And then you also get some votes, so let's talk about votes now. Sometimes the event deck will cause voting on a random agenda from a corresponding stack. First you get your voting income, then everyone votes pass or fail from the current bank of votes. This is done secretly and simultaneously, then all revealed at once. You just add up whether the pass or fail option ended up having the most votes. One more thing to mention. On the resource giving events, once everyone has spent the resources from the card, then you roll all of these dice. And every single player gets the black dice as additional resources. You don't get these 3 colorful dice yet, we'll talk about those throughout the review. that is all just the bare bones of the game. Much more to cover in the pros. Twilight Inscription lives up to the Twilight Imperium look by not only stealing some of its art, but by providing some new art. Yeah, so it's the exact same TI art on the cards and sheets, so the real new art is on the event cards. We haven't seen these before in a Fantasy Flight game, but correct us if we're wrong on that. Either way, it does look good. You also got a ton, and I mean a ton of flavor text, from the relics, faction backstories, and every event card. There's no kidding this game is supposed to be in the Twilight Imperium universe, and we checked the flavor text and it's in fact different than how it's written in TI4. There's also the TI excellence of great symbols all across the board, which is great because this game is pretty much all symbols. Like, see how small each of these sheets are? They managed to cram so many symbols into each sheet without making hunting for symbols confusing. That's quite an accomplishment. And then the 6 dice, these are really well made, though they are so big you might want to roll them separately or have 2 separate hands roll them. We gotta praise the included markers. These are chalk markers as the game says, and before opening them, the game says to shake them for 20 seconds with the caps on. So, go a little faster, The markers are real delight to use though, with the orange being bright and clear. Since they're chalk markers, they don't smudge easily when you put your arm or palm down on the sheet. For longevity, they're all working just fine after 4 games, but there was 1 out of the 8 that suddenly died on us, and then came back a week later, so not sure what happened there. The sheets are all laminated and look like they'll last a long time. Even after intense racing, they look like they have a lot of life left in them. And then there's 32 player sheets, so no problem if one of them wears out. Rulebook wise, this is also smooth to go through, with examples and visuals everywhere. There's arrows, helping boxes, and example commentary that is just so easy to follow. The clarification page on the back is also quite helpful come questions during gameplay. Now for gameplay pros, and we gotta start with how Twilight Inscription gives you some cool puzzling to do with your 4 sheets and how they play off of each other. So let's get into the mini game of each sheet. In navigation, you're trying to chart the most efficient route to Mechanical Rex, while also getting the most combination of stuff circled along the way. You also want to time when to push for relics, which get you more points and special abilities. Or for expansion, you're looking at what asset you're trying to go for to spend on other sheets. Then you see which planet is the fastest way to get that, and then by getting that asset, you're on your way to getting another asset. So you want to make sure you clear rows and columns appropriately. Industry is more crossing out of stuff, while also circling stuff. This is interesting because you can only circle something if it's right next to something you've permanently removed from the game. There's some deciding which scrap space gives you the best adjacencies. Then finally, Warfare has a slight minigame of placing troops to cover up points. You may want to intentionally go on these population areas, since that can give quite a bit of VP if you do this in conjunction with other population sources. See how population is a ramping VP source? You can't just keep spamming your favorite sheet though because of how the way unlocks work. So very frequently, you'll have to go to previous sheet to get unlocks there to do your other sheet, or at least to do that other sheet more efficiently. Want to get tech? Well, you probably have to get those tech assets by unlocking them in the expansion sheet. Want to cross out a bunch of planets on expansion? Well, you have to get the planets to spend in the navigation. As you get better, you'll find little tricks to accelerate your income. To get trade good income for trade goods you could use for any sheet can be grabbed from industry or navigation. Want more votes for when you have to vote in the game? Also increased via industry, but also on expansion. Want to have more guaranteed resources on any sheet? Grab something called focus die unlocks from the space docks on expansion. But you can also grab focus die unlocks from industry, and sometimes through winning combat. And just like you have all these factions in TI4 to use, you also got some factions in Twilight Inscription, that is 24 of them. 24 included factions in a single base box, meaning they included all the factions from the Prophecy of Kings expansion over there. Now these 24 aren't the most fleshed out compared to TI4, but they're decently similar, so let's get into some of them. Here's the poster child of Twilight Imperium, the Space Lions, the Hakan. These give you a flexible approach to the game because they're all about getting and exploiting those wild trade goods. They start with 2 of those, and then the first 2 trade goods they use each round are doubled in value. If you like Warfare, we got the Embers of Muad, who can never get blocked by the red dot anomalies on Warfare, so they can put more troops on each fight. Plus, when they surround these red dots, they get 3 trade goods to immediately spend on another sheet. Their faction ability, which you proc by circling the faction assets on the board, is of course to get a prototype Warson. Oh, see how we can start surrounding an anomaly to feed into our passive? And obviously mid-round, when you're marking stuff off, you can't just look at other people's sheets because that would be cheating, especially for Warfare. But if you play as the Yssarl, then you can look at their sheets. Let's get funky with the nomads, who can just let you draw their own symbol on sheets. You just draw the shape as your faction trigger, then get 2 trade goods to spend on each sheet where you have this shape. Their other ability is to look at the top card of the event deck at any time. Ooh, there's a war coming, better prepare for that. The robotic necrovirus, again, cannot vote but has a military buff. The Arbrek plants have insane infantry spam. Look, there's just so many abilities in here, we can't get through them all, but just keep in mind there's 24 of them, okay? 24. Let's talk about progression though, where you'll find your economy slowly ramping up as you play more and more rounds. So to elaborate on these guaranteed resources of focus die, these are unlocks you can do for each sheet in the game. And when you get that unlock, you have that focus die rolled for that sheet every single round. These die are literally guaranteed output of that symbol, and 1/3 of the time, there'll be 2 of that symbol. That's a ton of extra resources. Then there's 8 technology unlocks, 2 for each sheet. Wormholes let you explore more with shortcuts, or this other tech will let you get 2 free claims a turn. As long as they're small circles, that's free stuff. Or these expansion ones let you start marking off crazy amounts of stuff on planets every time you activate the sheet. Yeah, no doubt techs are the way to rush objectives. When you add up trade good and focus die, it's not surprising that mid to late game, you can have 8+ resources to spend on a sheet if you want. That's so much marking of stuff. Then we have to talk about replayability because each of these sheets has 2 different sides. So you can have slightly different boards to play on every game, with technically 9 different types of sheets for each category. You can mix and match the numbers, you can put 3A with 6A, you can do vice versa, go to town with this. Combine that with the 16 relics and 24 factions, and there's even more permutations. The last pro is that Twilight Inscription runs really true to time of 90 to 120 minutes. Like, the game is guaranteed to end because of the event deck flipping over every round. And so the last card in the deck, or the third to last card in the deck, will say, do a final war, and then the game ends. And since all the rounds are simultaneous of everyone just marking their own sheet by themselves, well, adding more players doesn't really increase the time length by much. Cons! You know how we said the included rulebook is good? Well, the other sheet, the play as you learn, learn as you play? No, play as you learn. Learn as you play as you learn. Anyways, okay, whatever. This one is not good. The problem with it is that while setup and visuals are good, it doesn't really give you an overarching reason of why you're doing anything. It starts with you going to navigation, then telling you to mark off things. Why? Don't worry about it. Just go to the next round and mark off stuff there. Oh, here are space docks. You can get this icon. What the heck does this icon mean? Why am I trying to get all these assets? Okay, I guess I'll just get these specialty assets. Then after the 4 first rounds, it'll tell you you're ready to play the game. Just deal out simple faction cards, separate the remaining cards into 8 piles, but then the game never explained what a pile was? We had to sleuth for ourselves that a pile is 2 cards, a blue card and a black card. Anyways, we advise that if you do want to use this learn as you play as you learn thing, well, then read the rulebook very carefully beforehand. And then after going through the 4 practice rounds as you do here, to just entirely start a new game and not continue the same practice game as they tell you to do here. Lastly, the 1 to 2 player mode could have used at least some more examples of how each round works, because there's only one little line that says the AI gained warfare and voting advancement through focus die. Not sure why they couldn't keep the good rulebook vibes here. The next con is the markers. Yep, they're just gonna inherently add some more annoyance to the game. Them being the good of not smudgeable during gameplay just adds more annoyance after the game of having to clean it up. Let's cut to cleanup time.
Very close. Yeah, this eraser sucks.
Yeah. Spending a planet thing is an action you can only take if this is act.
Come on. Just look how much you have to erase here. We were so concerned after 1 to 2 games of just erasing with this tiny eraser that we just started using alternatives instead. These problems are just what's gonna happen in a roll and write without throwaway sheets. So not really a clean way around this, but maybe an included microfiber would have been nice.
Hopefully those come off.
I'll tell you if they do.
Yeah, let me know.
Let's talk about visuals now, where even though we did praise the efficiency of symbols on these small sheets, the way they're set up can be a little confusing sometimes. Like, we know that you have them oriented in this 2x2 for efficiency, but sheets can play some eye tricks on you because the layouts are swathed for the top and bottom sheets. Your indicator on focus die are right next to each other, or you have the same exactly colored tech next to each other. It's not surprising to accidentally see the wrong focus die unlock for your current sheet and think you have extra focus die. Speaking of cheating, they give you a resource tracker as an optional way to manage resources you've gotten or spent for the round. Well, number one, this is really small and adds a little bit more annoyance in having to keep erasing it. But two is that it's only on one sheet, so if you're on another sheet, it's annoying to reference and jump back and forth between the sheets. While it would cost a little more, at least some type of component to keep track of things would have been nice here. Chits for each resource would be good, or a spin down dial. And what the heck is going on with the dice? Why aren't the symbols on the gray ones color coded? Like these resources are color coded on every single other part of the game. It's all too often we would be playing and then get confused about what symbol is what when you threw in the focus die. Lastly, there's this very small distinction between assets you spend whenever you want and assets you spend right away. And my gosh, this difference is not easy to spot during the heat of gameplay. We wish they would have given a different outline color to one of these. All of these visual annoyances just add up to this feeling of maybe possibly cheating in later rounds as the game gets more complicated. I mean, after all, boards are gonna look like a bunch of orange at some point. Our first gameplay con has to do with how Twilight Inscription has a weird emergent randomness execution for how rigid of a Euro it is. We mean rigid in how this game has low politics and low emergent randomness, of which almost all of we'll delve into here. This first emergent randomness is one of the main resource engines of the game, which is rolling 3 dice for every strategy event card to give you random resources. But you don't know which symbols you're gonna get. You don't wanna be beholden to that chance, right? So then to get guaranteed resources, well, then you get a focus die to get guaranteed resources of the ones you want on the sheets you want. This creates huge pressure to always get space locks early. There's never any downside or risk to getting them. In practice, it's almost always a very strong opening to start on navigation as your first sheet to get a planet. Then for your second sheet to go to expansion to spend that planet to get a space lock, then use that focus die unlock on whatever sheet you're focusing that game. It makes sense why focus die are guaranteed resources. It's a way to offset the big randomness from the gray dice. Which, yes, while they add some tension to each round, they can bite you in the butt if you really need to circle one thing on a sheet and you just can't, and it feels like a waste of a round. So what if the gray dice had guaranteed resources and the focus dice were random instead? That would lend to more decision making in letting you plan in how to use the gray dice, and then getting to react to what bonuses are rolled if you rolled them. This would better embrace this game's rigid nature, where currently it's designed where you just always rush focus dice, otherwise you lose. The second emergent randomness to focus on is the relics, which you can only get through exploring and claiming stuff on navigation, and these feel out of place in this rigid Euro with all their different power levels and abilities. Like, Tyrant's Lament is strong since it gives up to 10 combat in a single war as a reaction, so it basically guarantees a win on warfare without going there as a sheet activation. Sometimes you can even win against both of your neighbors as you orient the ship however you want. And remember, this also grants VP of its own. Stellar Converter is too stellar. It destroys a planet of your choice, and for each unclaimed asset, you get to spend resources on other sheets. If you do this for a big planet, you basically get 8 free resources to spend across 3 sheets. And this card is worth 5 points? What? Conversely, something like Crown of Floundnose is one of the worst ones to draw since it gives a low VP payout and only gives you an additional +1 strength in all wars. That's equivalent to a single extra infantry in each war. Ugh. Relics are just very one-dimensional bonus cards. If you draw a really good one, then yeah, that's freaking efficient. If you don't, or maybe draw it at the wrong time, well then it can feel like a buzzkill. There's no way to swap a relic for a new one, there's no way to counterplay an opponent's relic, there's no way to fight over shared relics. No. Let's talk about 2 main mechanics that don't hit their desired goals in this game. These 2 are the warfare and the voting. So the idea behind these 2 mechanics is that they're going to add some more player interaction to make you interested on what other people are doing outside of just putting your head down and marking these 4 sheets. But they just don't accomplish that goal. Warfare can initially seem like an arms race between you and your 2 neighbors, but the payouts from winning aren't that spectacular actually. Dragging down someone by 1 VP isn't that impactful, and the direct maximum you get from winning is 3 points, with maybe some benefits by getting population or points by covering those circles up. Rather, the best way to get points in Warfare is to simply build things. If you spend for a War Sun, that's 4 points. Dreadnought is 2 points. You can see how this is easily worth 10 plus points endgame. This makes specifically the most important endgame fights not really much of a mind game to beat your opponent because you just want to deploy ships to get all the points on your warfare sheet there. It doesn't help that the objectives are also about just placing the most amount of stuff possible, not even winning the wars. Our high scores in this game just involve the person just disregarding warfare for most of the game, getting their points from the other 3 sheets, then late game to just spawn a ton of unlocked ships and get a bunch of points there. Prioritizing warfare is still a valid strategy, but it just has to be done with specific factions that give you additional benefits for winning fights. But just don't expect interesting fighting from this game, and you'll find most of the time you want to save your attention to your other 3 minigames and not neighbors' combat strengths. Voting is the other weird one here, because you can't really interact with other people to sway their votes because you just don't really have any grounds for politicking in this game. You can't really convince people to vote or not to vote by promising to send them trade goods, by promising not to attack them, by promising to help them out in a war against their neighbor, which are all TI4 things. You just don't have politicking in this efficiency game. Like, note that in TI4 you also voted in a specific order, which led to even more nuance when casting votes. Here, it's just a simple throw-in of yes or no votes, which you don't really care much about spending because sitting votes don't help your engine in any way. In fact, votes are mostly useful in the fact that pursuing their income gives you a ton of points. So yes, while some agendas like a disarmament treaty sounds really cool to prevent players from building cruisers from the rest of the game, or technology embargo to axe an entire tech for the rest of the game, the execution is wonky. Sure, you can add up everyone's votes and guess what their intentions are. I mean, you'll have to look at all their boards carefully and probably ask them some questions, but the payoff from that work doesn't really give you a solid ground to cast votes well. And yes, some factions like the Nalu who get to vote last or use their voting as resources, or the Space Turtles who get to use their voting to win wars, these add a little more nuance to the voting phase, especially if you're a little more creative with using your votes. Like for the Space Turtles, you can say, oh, what if we agree to not attack each other and then we can both win the war there and get benefits? But these more diplomacy-centered factions are the exception to the rule of how voting is normally handled. Also, for the third agenda, there's even less nuance because votes aren't worth anything at the end of the game. So you usually just mindlessly put in all the votes into pass or fail. To make this worse, the voting in 1 to 2 player is kind of a joke. See, the robot gets a baseline amount of votes, then you just have to vote higher than it, plus some random amount of votes based off of a symbol on a die roll. Well, this gives you a very expected range of at most +2 on the vote, so you generally just dump in more votes to beat it if you can. And you'll always want to beat it because there's a slightly modified agenda in this mode. If you don't have enough votes, then you just save your votes, and then for the next vote, you probably just beat the bot. Now onto the faction balance, and yes, some of these 24 factions are just noticeably stronger or weaker than others. This really does matter in this efficiency race where you can't really interact with the person who's not sitting directly to your sides to fight them in warfare. And even that doesn't interact with them much. So let's look at Jolnar, who in TI4 were known as a strong faction, and they're once again strong here. So if they follow this order of sequencing, even just once, they get 2 green triangles to spend on technology. Wow, how's that for ramping up fast for tech as early as round 2? And then there's no penalty from deviating from this order, which is a really good order to follow anyways. Then their second ability is just free resources on an inactive sheet, which is also good, because anytime you get to spend on an inactive sheet, it's like you're cheating and getting another mini round. Or how about the Hakan, because by doubling trade good use for them, that's really good to be able to inject more in your engine early game, which sets you up for massive breakthroughs for points later on. Contrast that with the Sardak Nor, who are much worse than they are in TI4. Their top ability is just purely a negative. Okay, so then their bottom ability must be really good to compensate, right? No, it's okay. It's putting down 3 legions, which are 2 strength things. This is 6 total strength you get to orient in cool ways, so you're gonna get assets from doing this, but 6 strength isn't amazing, and it's not good enough to compensate for having a bad top ability. Look, faction assets are not a commonality in this game. There's only 4 ever. There's 1 on each sheet. It's not surprising to see people get all of them come end game, but it's not like you're triggering these like every round or anything. So we haven't played every single faction in this game, but the factions outside of those 3 don't seem too alarming, so the imbalance isn't that bad because you just have so much to pick from. Basically what you want to do is play factions that are all the similar power level and have them verse each other. Or if you want a single player challenge, you can pick any of these factions, like using the Sardak Nor in single player to see how high of a score you can get. Actually, speaking of the 24 factions, the replayability is just not as good in this game as initially thought. So the thing about the factions is that they don't actually change up the game that much. For each faction, you're still choosing which sheets you want to prioritize in the game, and then in which order you want to do them to make it the most efficient. And even when the sheets are different and you're using the asymmetrical sides, while it does cause the puzzling to be slightly more modified, it doesn't make you suddenly prioritize different sheets in the game. Add that onto the objectives, because there's only 3 objectives you can play with per sheet. So after 3 plays, you're going to start seeing all the objectives again. And the objectives aren't even that different per sheet. Claiming 5 planets versus claiming 12 consecutive systems are such similar goals that just require you to explore and claim a lot. Or for the voting agendas, there's only 4 agendas per deck. So after 4 plays, you're going to start seeing the same ones again. In fact, 24 factions is overkill. Why not just have 12 factions in the game and then make more objectives and agendas? Or maybe just make each faction more nuanced. After all, in Twilight Inscription's current state, you're not really getting benefited much from playing the same faction over and over again, so you pretty much have to jump factions for replayability. Nitpicks. Our one nitpick has to do with how these event cards are presented, specifically the strategy events that are the meat of the game, you know, the ones that cause normal rounds where you just spend stuff. Since they have such cool art, why spend so much space to run through the steps again and again? It's understandable why these tips are here for the earlier events, but then later on, it feels like such a missed opportunity to make the nice art bigger on the card. You only really have to see the resources granted. Scoring. Now it's time for the recommender score, where we try to critically evaluate this game by weighing the aforementioned pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And so, Twilight Inscription is going to get a 5 out of 10. It is average. Please make no mistake that this is nothing like the actual Twilight Imperium, despite looking a little bit like it. I mean, we've seen some really weird claims online that this is some type of 4X game. Oh my god. Yeah, this doesn't have extermination at all. And the exploring is kind of there. I mean, the only thing you're really having emergently explored is the random relics. And then it's also up to you to decide if marking Mechanical Rex on different boards is exploring in a shared universe. Twilight Inscription and Twilight Imperium are just vastly different ways to game. This newer one has you with your eyes on your stuff only, doing efficiency mostly through 3 sheets in an admittedly point salad type of way, while the space opera one is about keeping your head up, negotiating around a dynamic shared board when destructive fights happen when the players want to, namely around Mechanical Rex, which is just kind of like the moon in Twilight Inscription, where you just show up, say, haha, I was there first, then leave without doing much. If Twilight Imperium is diplomats trying to twist violent chaos to their own means, Twilight Inscription is scribes putting their heads down while sometimes getting distracted by trivial player interaction. So yeah, these are clearly not the same game at all, but Twilight Inscription is trying to grab all these Twilight Imperium isms and getting hurt because of it. The beloved TI agenda phase and the warfare are here, and this game is getting torn up because of it. These take away from the linearness of Twilight Inscription, where you pick a faction, and then you pick 2 to 3 sheets to prioritize, and then you just go on those until the game ends while you just mark out sheets with orange. Like, once you get pretty good at the game, you're almost always going to fill out 2 to 3 sheets to completion by game end, and then you know that there's going to be 4 wars. You don't really care if you lose a couple wars because it's only -1 VP. And then you know that there's either a 1/3 or a 1 out of 2 chance of wars happening every time you see a blue card flip. Twilight Inscription is an okay game, and if it didn't have warfare and agendas, meaning that it stuck true to its efficiency puzzling, it would actually be a 7 out of 10. And I mean, that would definitely help with the 1 to 2 player recommendation. Another roll and write comparison that stuck true to itself is Hadrian's Wall. That's all about box taking to progress your Roman civilization, and the combat is against the AI, which all leads to a game that is much easier to learn and shorter, but then again, that game doesn't have 24 factions, but it is cheaper. Oh yeah, and then also Hadrian's Wall and Twilight Inscription are really getting to hike up their price by saying they can be played with a lot of people and giving you a bunch of components to do so, but these head-down games are fundamentally pretty solitaire with some slight player interaction. For Twilight Inscription, the best player count to play with is 3, since that way you can interact with every single other player at the table. I mean, sure, you can add in as many people as you want, but if you're gonna go through the effort of that, are you sure you wouldn't want to play a game where one of the key objectives actually gives a different payout after 3rd place? Like heck, if you really want a simultaneous non-party game with a bunch of people, maybe try Seven Wonders that also has you attacking your neighbors while you build up a civilization. But unlike Twilight Inscription, you actually have to keep track of other people at the table, not just your neighbors, because them getting military affects your neighbors, which in turn your neighbors will try to get stronger, and it's an actual arms race. In Twilight Inscription, the warfare is separately against each neighbor, and remember, the consequences for losing are really nothing. Here's another fantastic Euro alternative, Dune Imperium, which yes, it kind of seems like a much different game, but hear me out. Dune Imperium has a Euro core of optimizing, with some interaction once in a while. That sounds like what Twilight Inscription wanted. In fact, Dune Imperium wants you to win fights by the skin of your teeth for efficiency, with some little surprise cards to help. Same thing as in Twilight Inscription. The idea is to barely win fights, with swingy relics for surprise, but then in practice, you're comparing sheets where you had to spend resources if you activated the warfare sheet, so it takes away tension with pretty minimal stakes. Twilight Inscription actually peaks on the second game. See, it's a little unwieldy to learn. Oh my gosh, there's so many symbols and mini games. So on your first game, you'll just start getting into the groove of things until mid to late game. Then on your second game, you'll know what to expect from each sheet, have a solid idea of where to get your points, and maybe even pick a faction that's more interesting to you. Then in your third game, well, even if you switch out your faction and then your sheets, well, you realize that, yeah, I'm still picking which sheets to optimize. My faction doesn't make it that much different. I'm still getting focus die to get more guaranteed resources. Oh yeah, the objectives are pretty much the same thing, and the event deck is pretty much the same too. Twilight Inscription is not a bad game, but definitely needs this TI brand to get attention, which probably demanded certain mechanics get crammed in to help sell it, which hurt it, so Twilight Inscription is a bit of a catch-22 as an idea. But if the Twilight Imperium universe is really compelling to you and you like marking stuff with a pen, then we can't fault you for getting Twilight Optimization.
My personal score for Twilight Inscription is a 2 out of 10 terrible time. It was awesome hanging out with friends and getting some amazing tacos before sitting down and not looking at each other's faces while we all did our own homework. Like, the only time I interacted with anyone in an actual game-related manner was just to ask how strong they were in combat, and if I wasn't going for combat, then I literally did not care about anyone else. Also, the combat sucks. It is extremely brain-dead in comparison to the other boards, which are actually fun, puzzly things to do. Doing Euro shit and sequencing build paths optimally is always solid gameplay and is the only reason why this isn't a 1 out of 10 because I still enjoy that aspect. Meanwhile, the combat is like playing those games for toddlers where you're trying to figure out which shape goes into which hole.
It goes in the square hole.
And I know there's technically interaction in objective racing, but it's pretty rare I'm gonna shift plans if I think I'm losing one, because I'm probably already spamming my faction's ability on one board that also has a bunch of extra dice pumped into it. So it's just more efficient to go for it, and if I end up getting to second place points, then whatever, I would have lost out on points anyways if I shifted my strategy, since points exponentially increase on every board. There's not nearly enough interconnectivity between the boards. They feel more like complicated checklists to finish in the way the dice say before moving on to max out the next one. But yeah, this game checks off like all the boxes for stuff I don't enjoy. Using writing utensils? Gross. I hate getting my hands dirty. Solitaire gameplay? Yep. A bunch of complexity, but not actually that much depth. Actions being tied to randomness, so you can't just always do whatever you want from a wide array of options. Yeah, the dice are like that until you get the bonus ones, then just constantly spam them for tempo and to bypass bad luck, which, in case you didn't notice, that's not a wide variety of decision making, that's just spamming the board with the bonus dice. And then when it comes to table presence and theme, the game falls flat there as well. Listen, I love TI4, but I'm not particularly attached to its world or lore or anything like that. I just like that it's a highly interactive game with space combat and there's tons of ships on a huge board full of planets. This game doesn't have the awesome table presence of TI4, just has a preschooler's refrigerator drawing composed entirely of orange scribbles. For me, this is definitely just another Euro, where what I find more enjoyable when playing these types of games is simply just talking to friends about random dumb shit instead of the game itself. But like, there's so many other things you can do with friends while still getting to talk to them that are way more entertaining. Blah, 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 you get the point, give me tons of options, cool table presence, manageable randomness, and player interaction. I'm sure my tastes are abundantly clear by now as for why I'm playing board games with friends.
My personal score for Twilight Inscription is going to be a 6 out of 10. I've been above average time with it. So yeah, you know what? As a game as solitaire as this, I actually found that number 1, the cross-referencing of sheets was pretty cool puzzling, but number 2, that dry erase markers and marking them on stuff is just extremely cathartic to me. I mean, you know, I've used a lot of whiteboards in the past as a reference for stuff. So yeah, I found it strangely pleasing to just put my head down and just focus on my 4 sheets and just go around just happily circling and marking stuff and just not really caring much about what other people are doing. And yes, I know it's definitely not TI4, but I found myself enjoying the faction art. I mean, duh, it's from TI4, but all of the pretty colors and names of thematic things just oddly satisfy me, even though I know they're not the real thing. I guess I'm just that much of a sucker for sci-fi themes. I kept asking myself, why the heck would I want to play such a solitaire, rolling and writing game if I went through the effort to get my friends all together? Why still is playing it at 3 to 4 players more enjoyable than playing it 2-player? And I guess it's just this collective vibe of enjoying the TI4 universe with, of course, some varying degrees of enjoyment from our friend group. But rationally, these enjoyments are pretty trivial things, which warns me how fleeting my enjoyment is for the game. Besides annoyance of not getting to interact with one person if I have 4 or more people at the table, I have a lot of concerns that felt worse the more I played. So my dirty little secret is that I found Twilight Inscription to be the most fun if I simply forget about voting and warfare until they come up and then purely focus on points. Then on this route to victory point gluttony, I push for warfare in the final fight to spawn a bunch of big ships for points and hopefully get the 3-point bonus to hopefully be enough to push me to win the game. It does admittedly lead to some rush endgame. Most of the time, voting feels like a really delayed way to give out random rewards. So I just want that to end ASAP so I can get back to my happy corner of circling stuff. Then the past 2 games, I really felt the irritations of rushing focus dice to be too good, and then stuff just being hard to keep track of. I'm playing a slight mental exercise to not cheat. Oh, and then I'm just utterly bored by all the event flips in this game. They just feel like resource icons to me. I couldn't tell you what they're actually called. I was expecting way more from this game though, like way more varied sheets or objectives, an agenda phase with some type of negotiation baked in, or even just units somewhat feeling like they're fighting each other. But nope, and I'm bummed out that something with this amazing universe just can't deliver harder past the first couple of games. Actually, I'd probably only play this again if one of my friends really wanted to play it, and then I would say, okay, sure, I'll teach it to you, and then pick one of the weirder factions like the Sarl or the Space Turtles. Twilight Inscription is just a passing fart in the wind for me, and if it didn't smell like TI4, my beloved universe, then yeah, Twilight Inscription would be a 5 out of 10 average time for me. Yep, that was Twilight Inscription. Thank you guys for watching the video, and as always, thank you to our patrons making videos like this possible. This was a pretty fun one to review. Yeah, I really do wish I had more replayability. Let me know what you think of the game, and if there's any other roll and writes that do something different from what we've seen in this game in Hadrian's Wall, let me know. And then also, Mad Lad to Cardboard right over there. And that's it for the video, yeah. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Frosthaven is slowly on its way. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.